The mansion stood high above the railroad town, a crown of stone and glass catching the fragile light of morning. Inside its walls lived a woman who had everything that could be bought, and yet nothing that could quiet the silent ache of her heart. Vivian Ashcroft pressed her hand to the window pane as steam rose from chimneys below, as if each plume of smoke carried away a piece of the life she longed for but could never claim. Her beauty was legendary, her education envied, her inheritance vast enough to make men bow before her name, yet she felt hollow, as though her soul drifted untethered across the wide Montana sky. The sparkle of her jewelry mocked her, cold reminders of her father's relentless ambition, while the modest diamond of her mother's wedding ring whispered of a love that once defied convention. That small glimmer of truth, simple and enduring, was the only healing warmth she carried against the chill of her carefully gilded existence. Every morning began the same. The housekeeper, Rosa's gentle footsteps, a tray of delicacies laid upon polished wood, another polite summons to face her father's study, and the parade of suitors who viewed her not as a woman, but as a ledger entry. Their gazes measured her worth in land and fortune, never once in dreams or laughter. She wondered if they noticed the way her eyes strayed beyond the horizon, where mountains glowed gold with sunrise, and the unknown called like a hymn. There, perhaps, life pulsed with breath and earth and honest hands. There, perhaps, she could learn what it meant to feel instead of perform, to build instead of inherit. The thought alone was a quiet rebellion beating inside her chest, fragile yet unstoppable, like spring roots pushing through stone. Her father spoke of security, of alliances sealed in marriage contracts, of respectability carved from connections with men like Harrison Whitfield, a man whose cold smile and calculating eyes turned her blood to ice. Whitfield was wealth meeting wealth, a convenient empire for the Ashcroft name. But in Vivian's secret hours, she remembered her mother's words, whispered in the soft glow of lamplight, long before death silenced them. Choose the one who sees your soul. That echo lingered, refusing to fade, and each time her father told her affection was a luxury, she clutched the memory tighter, knowing that love, like water, was essential to life. Without it, all her riches meant nothing. It was not until the county fair drew near, a rough gathering of ranchers, homesteaders, and dreamers, that the path of her story began to bend. She resolved to attend not as a prized daughter paraded for suitors, but as a woman seeking something real, though she had no words yet for what that meant. And in her heart stirred a restless anticipation, a whisper that destiny might be waiting in dust and laughter, hidden among ordinary folk, untouched by the weight of her name. The fairgrounds would be crowded, noisy, alive with contests of strength and music, with children's laughter and the scent of roasted corn. She would walk among them, leaving behind silks and diamonds, carrying only her mother's ring and the fragile courage that had begun to awaken within her. What she could not know was that in 3 days she would stand in front of a man whose presence would shake the foundations of her carefully built world. He was a quiet giant with storm-colored eyes, a man who measured life not in coins, but in effort and honesty. Their meeting would ignite whispers through the entire territory, but more than scandal, it would give her a promise she had never dared to hope for, a life she could feel in her bones. The story of Vivian's choice is not one of easy comforts, but of healing found in courage, of love discovered in defiance of expectation, and of two souls building something no wealth could buy. As her tale begins, let your heart lean closer, for in her longing you may recognize your own, an echo of the universal desire to be seen, cherished, and free. And if her journey stirs something gentle within you, if it offers even a breath of warmth in your own cold season, I invite you to walk with her through the chapters ahead. Leave your thoughts in the quiet of a comment, lend your voice with a like, and stay close by subscribing, so that this unfolding story of love and resilience may continue to reach every soul that needs its light. The fair is waiting, the air thick with autumn promise, and Vivian's steps are already moving toward it. Somewhere among the dust and timber, destiny waits, with arms wide enough to catch her fall, strong enough to teach her what it means to rise. The study smelled of polished oak and cigar smoke, a chamber designed not for comfort, but for command. Maps of mining claims covered the walls, ledgers of wealth sat heavy on the shelves, and behind the vast desk, Edmund Ashcroft himself loomed like the embodiment of every choice Vivian had not made. His broad shoulders carried years of ambition, his hands still calloused from prospecting, though now gloved in power and pride. Across from him, Harrison Whitfield waited, standing when she entered, bowing with rehearsed courtesy, his pale eyes assessing her as if she were a horse to be traded. Vivian's heart sank, even as she managed a graceful nod. Every word from him dripped with possession disguised as politeness. He spoke of railroad expansions, of Denver society, of advantages their union would bring, but none of it touched her soul. He saw not Vivian, the woman who dreamed of books, of travel, of something genuine. He saw only Ashcroft fortune wrapped in silk. She listened in silence as men discussed her destiny like figures on a ledger. Whitfield leaned closer than necessary, his fingers clinging too long on her gloved hand, his smile thin and sharp, never touching his eyes. She resisted the urge to pull back, reminding herself of Rosa's wisdom. To endure in silence was not the same as submission, but her silence had lasted too long. She felt it growing heavy, suffocating like the marble walls around her. When Whitfield spoke of strong children bred from their union, she remembered her mother's words. A cabin with love is better than a palace without it. The truth settled deep in her chest. She would rather face hunger beside a man who cherished her soul than sit crowned in jewels beside one who measured her like cattle. When Whitfield departed, leaving behind the echo of his intentions, Edmund leaned back in his chair with satisfaction. He spoke of security, of alliances, of respect. But Vivian's answer was a whisper too soft for him to notice. Everything except affection. Her father dismissed it as childish longing. To him, affection was a luxury, fleeting and foolish compared to the iron permanence of wealth. Yet her fingers found her mother's modest ring, and she knew affection was not a luxury. It was the very breath of life, the healing balm without which no heart could survive. That afternoon, desperate for air beyond marble and smoke, she saddled her mare and rode through Larkspur Junction. The town thrived with the restless hunger of the frontier, prospectors carrying dust-stained dreams, merchants tallying accounts, families building homes against the vastness of Montana. She passed the bank her father controlled, the hotel where men sealed deals over whiskey, the general store where gossip traded faster than goods. At the edge of town, the fairground was rising, timber beams set high for the coming celebration. The county fair, 3 days away, the event that gathered souls from ranches and homesteads scattered across the territories. There would be contests of strength, of skill, of spirit. There would be music, laughter, and the simple joy of honest people who lived by the labor of their hands. Vivian watched the workers with quiet yearning. Their calloused hands, their straightforward laughter, the sweat glistening honestly on their brows, all spoke of lives lived in truth, however hard. No man there would measure her by her dowry. They would not know or care about the Ashcroft fortune. And in that thought was her fragile hope. She longed for a glance, a word, a hand that saw her not as possession, but as woman. She longed to feel alive, even if only for an evening beneath the autumn sky. The mountains burned crimson with sunset as she turned her horse homeward. In her chest stirred not despair, but anticipation. Dangerous, reckless, intoxicating. The fair would come, and she would not enter it as her father's daughter, glittering bait for suitors. She would walk its dust as herself, bare of jewels, carrying only her mother's ring, and the fragile courage that now began to glow like a lantern within. She did not yet know that this choice would scandalize her family, nor that destiny already waited for her in the shape of a man whose quiet strength could steady storms. She only knew that something real was calling her, and she was ready to answer. The fair was rising, the air already thick with promise, and Vivian's steps would soon carry her into a world where one meeting would set fire to every boundary her life had drawn. The morning of the fair dawned with the crisp clarity of autumn, the kind of light that made the mountains appear sharper, the air more alive, every color of the landscape richer and more certain. Vivian rose before the sun had fully cleared the ridges, her heart restless, her body brimming with the tension of a choice already made. She stood before her wardrobe, silks and brocades spilling like captured wealth, but she pushed them aside. She reached instead for a simple riding dress of deep green, sturdy boots that had seen trail dust, and a cloak that whispered of journeys rather than ballrooms. Rosa braided her auburn hair with quiet hands, her eyes watchful, her smile tender, as though she knew without words that today was the threshold of something new. When Vivian slid her mother's ring onto her finger, the modest stone caught the early light like a flame. She felt strength flow through her, a healing warmth that steadied her resolve. The fairgrounds hummed with life long before midday, alive with voices, laughter, and the scents of roasting corn and wood smoke. Families spilled across the fields, children darted between tents, merchants hawked bright ribbons and sugared apples. Vivian moved through the crowd with an unfamiliar lightness, as though she were dissolving into the rhythm of ordinary life. No one bowed to her name here. No one calculated her worth in railroads or mines. She was simply another woman, her boots sinking into dust, her heart beating fast at the wonder of freedom. She passed the platform where Harrison Whitfield already held court, his voice loud with promises of expansion, his smile stretched too wide as he boasted to officials and their jeweled wives. He raised his hat when he spotted her, his gaze heavy with ownership. Vivian turned quickly, her pulse tightening, slipping deeper into the press of the crowd where his shadow could not follow. Drawn by the sound of cheers, she came upon the timber-pulling competition. Men strained against ropes, dragging massive logs across the packed earth, their muscles trembling with effort, sweat gleaming on their foreheads. The crowd shouted encouragement, laughter and admiration mingling with the thud of boots. It was there she saw him. Beau Maddox stood apart, taller than the rest, his frame broad and steady, as if carved from the same mountains that loomed beyond the valley. His shirt was worn, his boots patched, but his stillness radiated a power that silenced pretenders. He did not preen or boast. He simply studied the logs with quiet calculation, hands scarred and strong, rope held with a care that spoke of respect. The moment she saw those hands, calloused from honest work, yet gentle in the way they handled the coarse fibers, something inside her stirred like spring water breaking through stone. When his turn came, the crowd grew hushed. Beau knelt, running his palms along the timber, assessing its weight, then wrapped the rope across his shoulders. He pulled with a slow, relentless strength, boots digging into earth, every muscle straining not with arrogance but with devotion to the task. Inch by inch the log moved, groaning against the soil. The air was electric with anticipation. He passed the previous mark with steady determination, then kept going, his body a testament to patience and endurance rather than show. When at last he released the rope, the crowd erupted, voices rising like a hymn. He accepted their praise with a nod, slipping his gloves back on, claiming neither glory nor triumph. Vivian's breath caught. She had seen many men, polished, ambitious, adorned with wealth, but none who carried himself with such unshakable dignity. Watching him, she felt her hunger for something real sharpen into certainty. He was not gilded or rehearsed. He was substance, raw and true, like the earth beneath her feet. Without waiting for her courage to falter, she stepped forward. The crowd thinned, leaving him to hand a ribbon to a child who gazed up at him with awe. Vivian drew nearer, her pulse racing, until his storm-grey eyes lifted and met hers. For a moment the fairground noise faded into silence, and she felt stripped of pretense. He touched the brim of his hat in quiet respect. "Ma'am." Her throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "That was remarkable." "Just doing what needs doing," he answered, his words simple, his tone carrying the rough warmth of a man who wasted nothing, not effort, not speech. Something in her broke free. For years she had been caged by expectations, her words measured and trained. But here, before this man of strength and gentleness, she felt a wild honesty rise inside her. The watching crowd seemed to hold its breath as she drew in courage deeper than she had ever known. "Mr. Maddox," she said, her voice low but clear, "I have a proposition for you." He regarded her with calm, neither eager nor dismissive, only steady. "I'm listening." The words burst forth before she could silence them, fierce with longing, trembling with truth. "I want you to give me strong sons." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. A cup fell. A woman covered her mouth. A man muttered shame. Yet Beau did not flinch. He studied her face, his eyes searching past the scandal and into her soul, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet enough for her alone. "That's quite an offer, Miss Ashcroft. But I reckon you want more than just sons." Her heart pounded, her breath unsteady. "What do you mean?" He leaned closer, the clean scent of sweat and soap surrounding her, his voice like warmth against her ear. "I'll give you more than sons, ma'am. I'll give you a life you'll feel in your bones." The words pierced her, not with fear, but with a healing power she had never imagined. For the first time, she glimpsed the life she craved, built on sweat and laughter, storms and tenderness, something alive, something real. She whispered, "When can we speak of this further?" "Tomorrow, sunset. The old oak by your property," he said, tipping his hat again before walking away with steady steps, leaving her trembling, breathless, and utterly alive. Behind her, voices rose, whispers spreading like wildfire. Harrison's furious figure closed in, demanding answers, his grip cruel on her arm. But Vivian pulled free, her voice calm, her gaze steady. "I am making my own choices now." As she stepped toward her carriage, whispers following like shadows, she felt the pulse of her mother's ring warm against her skin. Tomorrow would bring storms, her father's rage, society's scorn, but tonight she carried with her the intoxicating certainty that she had crossed into a life of her own choosing. And somewhere under the same sky, Beau Maddox had given her a promise, not wealth, not comfort, but a life she could feel deep in her bones. The sun dipped low, burning the horizon crimson, and the fair's laughter faded behind her. Ahead lay consequences, fierce and unrelenting, but also the beginning of a destiny her heart had waited for all along. The storm at the Ashcroft mansion erupted the moment Vivian returned from the fair. The marble foyer, usually silent and cold, now rang with her father's furious voice. Edmund stood rigid beneath the chandelier, his face a thundercloud, while Harrison Whitfield lounged in the parlour with a glass of whisky, his expression wounded and poisonous. Rosa hovered in the hallway, her hands restless at the dust-cloth she carried, her dark eyes watchful and protective. The echo of the fairground still pulsed in Vivian's chest, the promise of Beau Maddox steady in her veins, yet the weight of her father's rage threatened to crush her resolve. "You humiliated this family," Edmund thundered, his fists slamming against the arm of his chair. "Half the territory saw you proposition a labourer like some common woman without sense or shame." "Beau Maddox is not a vagrant," Vivian replied, her voice steady though her heart raced. "He is a man of skill, character, and worth." "Character?" Harrison sneered from the doorway, his pale eyes gleaming with venom. "Do you even know if the man can read his own name? The entire town believes you begged him to father your children. You've made yourself the subject of every crude jest from here to Denver." Vivian lifted her chin. "Better to choose an honest man for myself than to be sold to one who thinks I am nothing more than a broodmare for his dynasties." The sharp crack of Harrison's hand against her cheek came before she could even draw breath. Rosa gasped, stepping forward, but Edmund's raised hand stopped her. The sting burned across Vivian's skin, but with it came clarity, a painful, piercing clarity that settled in her bones. For years she had bent beneath expectation, endured silence, and swallowed her own voice. Now, in the echo of that slap, something inside her uncoiled and stood tall. "You will apologize to Mr. Whitfield," Edmund said, his tone low and dangerous, "and you will marry him within the month, or you will be cut off entirely. No inheritance, no name, no protection." Vivian touched her cheek, her fingers trembling, the copper taste of blood where her teeth had cut her lip. Then she straightened, her spine strong as iron, her voice quiet but unyielding. "No." The single word fell into the silence like a stone into still water, sending ripples that none of them could call back. Edmund's face went pale, then darkened with a rage that cracked his composure. Harrison muttered threats, his pride wounded beyond repair, but Vivian no longer heard him. She turned and walked from the room, her steps steady, her head high. In her chamber, she pressed shaking hands to her face, the heat of humiliation still burning. Yet beneath the pain lived a strange exhilaration, the terror of having burned bridges behind her, but also the undeniable freedom of finally choosing herself. She sat by the window, staring into the night where the silhouette of the mountains loomed eternal, and felt her mother's ring warm against her finger. For the first time, she knew she was not living as a shadow in her father's house. She was walking toward something real. The following evening, as the sun painted the sky in molten shades of rose and gold, Vivian rode to the old oak tree at the edge of the Ashcroft homestead. The land stretched wide, untamed but waiting, its fences sagging, its barn roof caved in. It was not wealth nor splendor, it was possibility, raw and fragile. And beneath the oak, Beau Maddox waited. He had cleaned himself for the meeting, hair combed back, stubble gone, his shirt freshly laundered, but his presence remained the same, steady, grounded, like earth itself. "I wasn't certain you'd come," he said, touching his hat as she dismounted. "I keep my appointments," she replied softly, though he could see the faint bruise on her cheek beneath the powder. His grey eyes darkened, but he did not press. Instead, he listened as she laid out her plan, her desire to see the homestead restored, her need for someone with his skill to make it thrive. She spoke of wages, of responsibility, of partnership. When she finished, he studied her in silence, then turned his gaze to the valley. "It's good land," he said at last. "A man could build something lasting here. But tell me, Miss Ashcroft, why trust such a project to a man you met only yesterday?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with honesty. "Because I want to build something real. Not a life handed to me by inheritance, not a cage gilded with wealth, but a life that comes from effort, sweat, and courage. I want to prove to myself and to my family that I am more than a daughter waiting to be sold, and if there are consequences, I will face them." His gaze held hers, steady and unreadable. "I'll work your land, but under my own conditions. I work for you, not your father. If you want to learn, I'll teach you, but I won't do the work while you watch from a distance. And if this becomes more than honest labor, I'll walk away." "Agreed," she said without hesitation. Their hands met in a shake, his palm rough and warm against hers, the contact lingering a moment longer than necessary. It was not just an agreement. It was a spark, a quiet promise that something more than labor was already forming between them. That night, as she rode back through the darkening hills, the bruise on her cheek throbbed, but her heart beat with a new rhythm, steady, sure, alive. She had taken her first step beyond the suffocating halls of her father's mansion into the unknown world of creation, struggle, and perhaps even love. At dawn, she returned to the homestead, and there was Beau, already at work beneath the barn's sagging beams, sleeves rolled to his elbows, hammer in hand. He glanced up at her, his eyes calm, his voice quiet. "You're early." And with that single greeting, the true beginning of her life unfurled. The October mornings at the homestead were crisp and fragrant, each breath carrying the scent of frost and earth, each sunrise washing the valley in light so pure it felt like a blessing. Vivian arrived with baskets of provisions, her skirts tucked for practicality, her cheeks flushed from the ride through fields of tall, dry grass. She found Bo already at work each day, his body moving with steady rhythm as he repaired the broken bones of the barn. His sleeves rolled high, muscles flexing beneath sun-browned skin. He looked like part of the land itself, rooted, enduring, shaped by storms yet unbroken. Watching him, she felt something in herself healing, as though her restless soul had finally found a place to breathe. Her first task had been humble, making breakfast on the small wood-burning stove inside the cabin. Rosa's lessons guided her hands, though the bacon smoked too quickly and the eggs cooked unevenly. Bo joined her, his expression unreadable as he sampled the meal, then nodded gently. "It's good." She laughed softly, knowing he spoke kindness more than truth, but gratitude filled her heart. It was not perfection he valued, it was effort. That morning, as they ate side by side at a rough wooden table with the wind rattling the shutters, she felt more genuine contentment than she had ever known amid chandeliers and crystal goblets. Their days slipped into rhythm. She held boards steady as he hammered mixed mortar for chimney stones, fetched tools from where they had been scattered in dust. The work blistered her palms, ached her muscles, left sweat clinging to her skin, yet it stirred a deep pride she had never tasted before. Each fence mended, each nail driven, each patch of roof secured felt like a piece of herself reclaimed. In the evenings, she carved small objects from wood scraps, a spoon, a button, a trinket box, under Bo's patient instruction. When he told her she had good hands for the work, she flushed with quiet joy. The wooden spoon she shaped, plain but strong, became a treasure she tucked against her heart, proof that she could create rather than simply inherit. Between the labor, their conversations unfolded like rivers, slow, steady, carrying secrets to light. She spoke of her education, the books she loved, the dreams she had whispered only to the night sky. He spoke of Missouri before the war, of his father's craft as a cabinet maker, of the restless years wandering from ranch to ranch, searching for a place to build instead of drift. There was no judgment in his questions, no calculation in his gaze. He saw her not as heiress or ornament, but as a woman learning, trying, capable of more than she believed. In his presence, her defenses melted, leaving only the raw truth of her yearning, to belong to something real. Evenings by the hearth softened into intimacy. She watched the firelight play across his face, catching the silver flecks in his storm-grey eyes, tracing the rugged line of his jaw. Sometimes silence lingered between them, but it was a silence filled with warmth, not absence, a healing stillness that calmed her restless heart. When his hand brushed hers as he passed a tool or lifted a cup, the contact left sparks that pulsed long after. She began to dread the moment she mounted her horse to leave, her body already aching for the next dawn when she would return. It was on the fourth day, resting together after splitting wood, that the truth in her heart pressed forward. She confessed softly that she had never felt so alive, never felt so useful, never felt more herself than in these hours beside him. Her voice trembled, yet she held his gaze. He listened with the same quiet gravity that marked all his responses, then reached across the table that evening to lay his rough hand gently over hers. His touch was warm, steady, and his words simple but binding. "Then we'd better make sure we build something worth the sacrifice." Her father's ultimatum still hung over her like a storm: marry Harrison or lose everything. But Vivian knew, with a certainty that steadied her, that she had already chosen. She would rather lose wealth, status, and the comforts of her name than give up the chance to create something true with the man before her. That night, when he walked her to her horse beneath a sky jeweled with stars, his hand lingered at hers as he helped her mount. It was a touch that carried promises not yet spoken, but already alive between them. As she rode through the quiet fields toward the mansion she no longer considered home, the wooden spoon pressed against her chest like a talisman. She realized that what she had longed for all her life was not gilded halls or fine dresses, but this: blistered hands, aching muscles, simple meals, and the companionship of a man whose presence made her feel whole. The barn's beams, rising strong again beneath their shared labor, became a symbol of her own rebirth. Tomorrow would bring new tasks, new battles, and perhaps deeper storms with her father. Yet for the first time, Vivian welcomed the challenge. For in Beau's steady presence, she had found not only the beginning of love, but also the healing certainty that she was no longer a ghost wandering her own life. She was building, piece by piece, nail by nail, a future that was hers. And as the stars shone above the valley, she knew with aching clarity she had begun to fall in love. The attic smelled of cedar and dust, a forgotten kingdom of trunks and boxes where time itself seemed to hold its breath. Vivian knelt before an old chest draped in a yellowed sheet, her fingers trembling as she pulled the cover aside. Inside, wrapped in tissue that crackled like brittle leaves, lay her mother's wedding dress, modest and elegant, its ivory folds carrying the memory of vows spoken in love rather than calculation. Beneath it, tied with a faded blue ribbon, was a bundle of letters. She sat back on her heels, heart thudding, as though she had unearthed relics sacred enough to alter the course of her life. The handwriting was her father's, familiar yet startlingly tender in its younger form. "My dearest Catherine," one began, the words infused with a passion Vivian had never seen in the stern man who now commanded her future with iron certainty. He wrote of wildflowers gathered by hand, of dreams of a cabin built with his own strength, of a love so consuming he could not imagine drawing breath without her. In reply, her mother's voice, delicate yet fierce, spoke of choosing him despite her family's disapproval, declaring that true security came not from wealth, but from being cherished completely. Letter after letter unfolded a love story far different from the cold arrangement Vivian had witnessed growing up. Yet, as the years passed within the pages, the tone shifted. Success hardened Edmund's words into short reports, calculations, obligations. Catherine's replies grew lonelier, aching for the man who had once promised her joy beyond measure. The final letter, penned months before her death, whispered a prayer. "I hope our daughter will have the courage to choose differently when her time comes." Tears blurred Vivian's sight, dropping onto the faded paper like dew on parchment. In her hands she held proof that her mother had lived the very contradiction she now faced, choosing love only to watch it buried beneath ambition. And yet those first letters shone like a lantern, proof that her father too had once believed in something purer. The revelation cracked the shell of bitterness she carried toward him, showing not just a tyrant of wealth, but a man who had lost himself in the pursuit of permanence. For the first time, she felt not only defiance toward him, but also pity. When she descended from the attic, the letters pressed close against her heart. she found her father waiting in his study. He stood by the window, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the town below, the empire he had built brick by brick. His face, carved in stern lines, softened only for a moment when he turned. "Harrison tells me you spend your days at the homestead," he said, his voice steady but weighted. "With Maddox." "Yes," she replied simply. "He is a working man with no prospects. Your marriage cannot be built on whims of affection. It carries the weight of alliances, of our family's name." Her hand tightened around the letters hidden in her pocket. "Like mother's marriage to a poor prospector?" The words struck him. His eyes flickered, surprise breaking through his control. "You know about that?" "I know about the man who once wrote her letters full of wild flowers and promises," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. "I know she believed in a love that saw her soul. Do you remember, Father? Do you remember who you were when you wrote those words?" The silence between them deepened, and for the first time Edmund's composure cracked. He lowered himself into his chair, the weight of memory dragging him down. "I was a different man then, poorer, but perhaps richer in ways that mattered more. Success changes a man. Responsibility, the fear of losing everything, makes steel of the heart." "Or cages it," Vivian whispered. His gaze lifted to hers, tired and raw. "You see him as your chance to choose differently, but love alone cannot keep hunger from the door." She thought of Beau's steady hands teaching her to split wood, his patience guiding her through every clumsy task, the strength in his voice when he said they would build something worth the sacrifice. "Beau Maddox has more than love, Father. He has integrity. He has skill, and he gives me something no fortune ever has, the courage to feel alive." Edmund studied her for a long moment, perhaps seeing in her face the reflection of the young Catherine who once defied her family for him. At last he sighed, a sound more weary than angry. "Bring him to dinner. Let me look him in the eye before I condemn what you are building." When Vivian left the study, her steps were light, her chest filled with both triumph and fear. Tomorrow night, Beau would sit across from her father, and the truth of his character would be tested beneath the scrutiny of the man who had built an empire. That evening, by the hearth of the homestead cabin, she told Beau of the dinner invitation. The lamplight softened his face as he listened, his thumb tracing circles across her hand where it rested in his. "Your father wants to measure me," he said, voice calm. "He wants to know why I would give up everything for you," she whispered. "And what will you tell him?" Her eyes glistened, her words trembling but true. "That I love a man who sees me for myself, not for what I represent. A man who has taught me that real security comes not from wealth, but from being valued completely." The silence stretched between them, filled with firelight and the beating of their hearts, until he leaned forward and sealed her confession with a kiss that felt less like stolen passion and more like a vow. When he pulled back, his grey eyes held both shadows and promise. "Then I will tell him I love his daughter enough to spend my life proving she made the right choice." Outside, the night spread wide and star-filled, wrapping the valley in stillness. Tomorrow would bring trials, scrutiny, perhaps even rejection. But tonight belonged to the healing certainty that whatever storms awaited, they would face them together. The evening of the dinner arrived cloaked in tension, though the autumn air outside was cool and fragrant with pine. Vivian prepared carefully, her gown chosen not for extravagance but for quiet grace, emerald silk that mirrored her mother's simplicity more than her father's opulence. Rosa's hands were steady as she pinned Vivian's hair, whispering a blessing in her native tongue, a thread of comfort woven through nerves. Beneath the folds of her skirt, Vivian carried her grandmother's small derringer, not out of distrust for Beau, but because she knew too well how quickly dignity could be threatened in her father's house. She slipped her mother's ring onto her finger, its gentle weight a reminder that love was once chosen here, long ago, and could be chosen again. Beau arrived at the mansion as the sun dipped low, his dark suit freshly pressed though plainly worn, his boots polished until they gleamed. He carried himself with a dignity unshaken by surroundings, his posture straight, his gaze calm. When Rosa admitted him, the servants whispered in surprise, their eyes darting between the man's roughened hands and the silent authority that clung to him like a mantle. Vivian met him at the foyer, her heart both racing and soothed by his presence. His eyes softened at the sight of her, and though he said nothing, the quiet admiration in his gaze steadied her. Edmund received them in the parlour, his frame a looming silhouette against the firelight. His handshake with Beau was firm, testing, the silent duel of men measuring worth without words. Beau did not waver. He met Edmund's eyes with unwavering calm, the look of a man who neither begged nor boasted. When Edmund gestured to the table, they took their places, Rosa serving with quiet precision before disappearing to the edges, her watchful presence an anchor. The conversation began with polite inquiries, Edmund probing about Beau's work at the homestead, his skills, his intentions. Beau answered with honesty, never embellishing, never apologizing. He spoke of carpentry, of fence building, of restoring the barn. His words were plain, but their steadiness carried a deeper truth. He was a man who built, not one who consumed. Then Edmund's questions turned sharper. "You served in the war," he said, his eyes narrowing. "Major, according to the documents my daughter stumbled across. Why does a man with such rank bury himself in ranch work instead of seeking office or fortune?" Beau's gaze did not falter. "Because I've seen what ambition without conscience makes of men. I chose a life of building, not destroying. Honest work brings a man peace. It brings healing to hands that have held too much blood." His voice carried a quiet ache, but also a weight of conviction that filled the room. For the first time, Edmund's stern face softened, though only slightly. "And what do you intend for my daughter?" "She is accustomed to more than cabins and ploughed fields." Beau looked directly at him, then at Vivian, his grey eyes steady, his tone warm and resolute. "I intend to give her what she has never been offered, a life where she is seen, where she builds with her own hands, where her spirit breathes free. I cannot promise riches or comfort in abundance, but I can promise respect, partnership, and a love strong enough to weather storms. That is the foundation we are laying at the homestead." The words filled Vivian's chest with light, a healing warmth that loosened the knots of fear within her. She glanced at her father, expecting fury or dismissal. Instead, Edmund's eyes flickered with something like recognition, an echo of the man who once wrote love letters to a schoolteacher beneath Montana's wide skies. Dinner passed with fewer words, but not with hostility. Edmund listened, his silence less sharp now, more contemplative, as though he were weighing not just Beau's answers, but his own regrets. When the plates were cleared, he stood, extending his hand once more. "Mr. Maddox," he said slowly, You've given me much to consider, perhaps more than I expected. I will not decide tonight, but I will not forbid my daughter from continuing this endeavor. Let time prove your worth." Beau clasped his hand firmly, offering neither triumph nor supplication. Time will do just that. As they left the mansion, the night air wrapped around them, cool and bracing, filled with the scent of wood smoke and the distant hum of crickets. Vivian exhaled, her body trembling with the release of tension. Beau walked beside her, his hand brushing hers, steady and grounding. She looked at him beneath the moonlight and whispered, "I told him I love you." He stopped, turning toward her, his gaze soft yet fierce. "And I told him I love you enough to spend my life proving you were right." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the faint trace of bruise still lingering. Then he kissed her, a promise sealed not in passion alone, but in vow, in healing certainty, in the quiet power of two souls choosing each other despite the world's weight. They parted only when the sound of night pressed close around them again. Vivian leaned into his side as they walked toward the carriage, her heart steady for the first time in years. Tomorrow would bring new trials, new storms. But tonight, beneath the stars, she carried with her the unshakable truth that they had begun to build a life not just of survival, but of love deep enough to mend wounds, fierce enough to face whatever darkness threatened. The homestead awaited, fragile but rising, and with it their future, rooted not in her father's empire, but in the healing strength of their shared resolve. The harvest festival dawned beneath a sky polished bright by autumn winds, the kind of crystalline light that made every tree, every ridge, every face in the crowd seem touched with something eternal. Vivian stood on the platform beside Judge Morrison, her emerald dress fluttering against the wooden rail, her mother's ring gleaming like a secret flame. In her hands she held the portfolio of evidence, heavy not only with documents, but with the weight of truth itself. Below her, the fairgrounds thrummed with life. Families gathered from across the territory, children laughing, the air spiced with roasted corn and wood smoke. Yet beneath the merriment there pulsed unease, a hush waiting to be broken. Beau lingered at the rear steps, rifle slung easily across his shoulder, his storm-grey eyes sweeping the crowd with the calm vigilance of a man who had once led others through chaos. His presence was her anchor. His steady gaze reminded her she was not alone. Judge Morrison's voice rang out, clear and solemn. "We gather not only to celebrate the fruits of our labor, but to confront shadows that have long stolen from honest men and women." A murmur spread like wind over tall grass. Then Vivian stepped forward, her heart steady despite the eyes upon her. "3 weeks ago," she began, "I discovered that the mining claims of my family and of many of yours have been stolen piece by piece through forged surveys and fraudulent deeds. We believed our losses were isolated misfortunes. They are not. They are the work of powerful men who see us only as obstacles to their greed." The words rippled through the crowd. Ranchers nodded, miners shouted in recognition, women clutched children whose futures had been carved away by invisible hands. She lifted the original town charter, its seals undeniable. This document, and the copies preserved, prove the conspiracy. These boundaries, signed and sealed decades ago, have been altered in secret to enrich a syndicate that hides behind officials and businessmen. Whitfield's voice cut through, sharp with scorn. "Lies! the hysterics of a spoiled heiress led astray by a hired hand. He climbed the steps, waving a warrant he claimed bore the judge's signature. "I arrest you for fraud and conspiracy." But Morrison rose, his face thunder. "That signature is a forgery. I would know, for it is mine." Gasps tore through the fairgrounds. Then came the gunshot. It cracked through the autumn air, aimed not at a body, but at the charter itself. Paper burst into fragments, scattering like leaves. Whitfield shouted triumph. "The evidence is gone!" But Vivian, her voice clear as a bell, drew forth the second portfolio. "No, Mr. Whitfield. Every document has been copied. Your thefts are recorded, your crimes preserved." The crowd roared, a thunder not of fear, but of awakening. Beau's rifle lifted, his voice commanding, "Behind the platform! Hold your ground!" The people obeyed with startling unity, forming ranks as ranchers, miners, and mothers with fire in their eyes closed around the conspirators. Honest deputies moved in, seizing weapons from hired guns. Whitfield lunged for Vivian, his hand crushing her wrist. "You've ruined everything," he hissed. She felt her grandmother's derringer pressed against her thigh, but she did not fire. Instead, she met his eyes with calm steel. "My place is beside the man I love, fighting for justice." Beau was suddenly there, silent as shadow, his voice low and lethal. "Release her, now." The weight of his presence made Whitfield's grip falter. When he staggered back, Morrison's declarations split the air. "These men stand accused of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Let the law take them." The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in triumph. Honest men surged forward, seizing the guilty. Deputies bound their hands. And through it all, Vivian stood with Beau's hand warm at her back, her heart thundering not with fear, but with healing certainty. Together they had faced the storm, and together they had won. Months later, spring unfurled across the valley. The homestead thrived. Barn rebuilt stronger, fields ploughed, fences mended. Roses bloomed by the cabin door, planted by Vivian's hands in soil she had worked until her fingers blistered. Inside, the cradle Beau had carved cradled not only wood, but expectation, waiting for the child she now carried. Her father visited often, not as the stern patriarch of old, but as a man humbled, rediscovering the gentler heart of his youth. Rosa tended the garden, laughter rising with the song of birds. Beau worked beside Vivian, his touch always steady, his presence a constant reminder that love was not an indulgence, but the foundation of life itself. One evening, as the sun melted into violet shadows and the air was sweet with new blossoms, Vivian stood in the doorway of the barn. She rested her hand on her rounded belly, watching Beau stroke the flank of a foaling mare, his voice soothing, his movements sure. The sight filled her with a love so deep it brought tears. She remembered the night at the fair when she had spoken recklessly, desperately, of wanting strong sons, and she smiled, for he had given her something far greater, a life that pulsed with truth, a future built on partnership, and the healing knowledge that she was not alone. As stars blinked into being, she walked to him, slipping her hand into his. "Do you ever regret it?" she whispered. He looked at her, his eyes soft as dusk. "Not for a moment. You gave me a reason to build, not drift. You gave me home." His kiss was gentle, full of promise. And in that kiss she felt her mother's blessing, her father's forgotten love, the strength of every woman who had chosen courage over comfort. This was their legacy. Not gold, not empire, but love, resilient as mountains, healing as rivers, and alive as the child who stirred within her. And to you who carry this story in your heart, if its warmth has touched you, let it live beyond this page. Press like, leave your thoughts in a comment, and subscribe to walk with me through the next tales yet to come. Your voice is part of this journey, and together we keep the light of stories burning, healing, and alive.